Okay, Assalamu alaikum students. How are you all? I hope that you all are doing well. I welcome you to your next e-lesson. In this e-lesson, we are going to be covering Unit 6, Comprehension 5, Misery, page 165 from your Oxford Progressive English. While we will be discussing this unit, open the page 165 and keep the pencils in your hands and underline the difficult words, as you will have to write those words into your notebooks along with their meanings. Now let's begin with our comprehension, Misery. It is a folk tale from Poland. Alright, so what's a folk tale? A folk tale is an old story that has been told again and again, often for generations. Folk tales are stories in the oral tradition, or tales that people tell each other out loud, or word to word, rather than stories in written form. They are closely related to many storytelling traditions, including myths and fairy tales. So, this story is one of those. First, let's give a look at some difficult words. Misery means great unhappiness. Mansion means a huge house or palace. Glanced means to look briefly. Plank means a long flat piece of wood. Plague, an infection or a disease. Prospered means be successful. Cunning means skillful or clever. Treasure means collection of valuable things. Flourished means to grow or develop well or thrive. Hollow means having empty space inside. Alright students, so these are some difficult words. Now let's begin. Paragraph 1. In a land far away, there once lived a rich man in a fine mansion, and a poor man who dwelt in a hovel nearby. The rich man lived well, but his neighbor's life was hard and wretched, for misery lived in his house. So it is said that the rich man lived well, but the poor man's life was not very good and is very unhappy. And the reason was the misery lived in his house. Misery sat in the chimney corner. He made the poor man's fire smoke and burn low, so that his house was never warm. Misery sat at the poor man's table and breathed upon his food, so that what little meat he had was tough and tasteless. So it is said that the misery used to live in the chimney of poor man's house, and it never let the fire burn properly, and it never let the food tasty. Paragraph 2. Then one spring morning the wife looked out at the earth newly waking and the flowers coming into bloom. She thought our life would not be so very bad if only misery did not live with us. So she spoke kindly to her husband and asked him if they could find some way to drive misery out. So it is said that it was one beautiful morning. The spring was coming, the trees were blooming new leaves, the flowers were coming out. So the thought came into the wife's mind that their life could change just this way as well. only if they are able to drive misery out of their home. So she spoke to her husband about this and she discussed it with him. Her husband was touched by her words and he sat and thought. Then he went into his woodshed and picked up a white plank of wood. He called to his wife and together they set out into the wild wood. So, when the poor man's wife spoke to him about driving misery out of their house, it gave him something to think about. And then he came up with a plan. Then he went into his woodshed and take out a plank of wood and asked his wife to follow him, and they started into the woods. After they had walked some way, the man looked back and saw misery following them. They reached a deep stream, and the husband put down the plank for his wife to walk across. Quickly he followed her, pulling up the plank before misery could reach it. So, after reaching deep into the woods, the poor man glanced behind him and then he saw that misery was following them. Then they reached a stream, and then what he did, he put the plank he brought with him over so that they could cross the stream. And then after his wife, he crossed the stream as well, and very quickly he picked up the plank because he didn't want misery to follow them. But when he glanced back again, he saw that misery had moved a huge tree trunk so that he could cross the stream and was still following behind. But what happened was, then when after picking up the plank, when he looked behind him, he saw that misery was not only depending on the plank that the poor man had, but what it did, it dragged the trunk of a very huge tree and put it on the stream and cross it and then keep on following them. Paragraph 3. The poor man knew of an old hollow tree deep in the wood. When he reached it, he put down the plank, cut a branch from the tree, and began to shape some wooden wedges. Misery came closer to see what he was doing. "I can't stand living with misery any longer," the man said loudly to his wife. "I am going to shut myself up in this hollow tree where he can never get at me again. You must drive in the wedges, wife, to hold the plank fast and keep him out." So what happened was, the poor man started making some wedges out of the tree branches, and then he started saying loudly to his wife as well that he doesn't want to live with misery anymore. He is going to shut himself inside the hollow tree and put the wedges on it, and then he asked his wife to fast the wedges very nicely and tightly so that misery cannot reach him. "I will do it, husband," said the wife, for she saw that her husband was setting a trap. So what the wife of that poor man did, that she said that "I am going to do it as you are asking me to. I am going to put the wedges on the hollow tree and put you inside so that misery cannot reach you," because she sensed it that her husband is up to something and he is setting a trap for misery. Misery could not bear to see the poor man escape him, so at the last moment he sprang into the hollow tree. Just as the man was climbing in, at once the man jumped out again and with his wife's help put the plank in place and drove the wedges home. When it was done, the poor man and his wife looked at one another and laughed for the first time in many years. So what happened was, the man was started going into the hollow tree, but the misery didn't want him to escape him, so it jumped before him into the hollow. So when the poor man saw that the misery is into the hollow tree, he jumped out of the hollow and with the help of his wife he covered the hollow tree and trapped Misery inside. And after doing so, they realized that they get rid of Misery. They looked at each other with happiness and they just laughed after many years. Paragraph 4. With Misery gone, the couple walked home hand in hand, and it seemed that already their luck was changing, for they found a purse with some gold coins lying in the road. Soon the poor man's house was a very different place. The fire burned brightly, the food tasted good, the vegetables in their garden flourished, and they had enough to sell at the market. So what happened was that when they started coming back home after trapping Misery inside that hollow tree, they found a bag of gold on the road and they picked it up. So their luck already started changing because Misery left them. And then they didn't stop there. Their vegetables started growing, their house was warm, and they had something to sell in the market, and also their food was tasty as well. The hens laid more eggs, and soon they made enough money to buy a sheep. The wife sang as she swept the house clean. With Misery gone, life was worth living at last. But the man was still afraid that Misery might escape from the hollow tree and come back to plague them. So each week he went to the tree to make sure that the wedges were still tight. And if any seemed loose, he would hammer them in again. So, because of good vegetables and everything flourishing, they had enough money to buy a sheep for themselves as well. The hens were laying more eggs for them. But man was still a little worried that what if Misery will escape and come back to them again. So what he used to do, he used to go into the wood to the hollow tree to check upon the Misery if it is still inside, properly trapped. And he used to look at the wedges, and if he find any loose, he used to hammer them inside again. Paragraph 5. Now the rich man had noticed how his poor neighbor prospered. He has found some treasure, he thought, and he goes into the wood each week to take a little more gold from his store. So what happened was, the rich man, who was the neighbor of this poor man, noticed that the life of his neighbor has changed and he is flourishing and he is not poor anymore. And he noticed that he is going every night to the woods, and then he assumed that he is going over there to a store that he had, and he is getting the money from there where he is storing it, because he thought that that poor man found a treasure and he is going into the wood every day for getting some more for himself. So the next time the poor man went into the wood, the rich man followed him. Watching from the bushes, he saw the poor man hammering away at the wedges. So what happened was, the rich man was curious. So next time he saw his neighbor going into the wood, checking upon Misery, he followed him, and then he hid behind bushes, and he saw the man hammering the wedges in again of that hollow tree. Thought the rich man, so that is where he keeps his treasure. Although he was wealthy, he was always greedy for more gold. He waited until the poor man had gone and quickly knocked out the wedges to see what was hidden in the hollow tree. And at once Misery leaped out. He was so pleased to be free that he followed the rich man home, and from that day lived in his house instead. So what happened was, the poor man left after hammering in the wedges. The rich man went over there to open the wedges to see that how much treasure is hidden over there and what is in there. He opened the wedges, and as soon as he did it, the Misery came out of that hollow tree. and it was so happy to be free that it followed the rich man home. So the rich man's greed took him down, as he was rich, but he was greedy for more gold and more money and more treasure. And out of his greediness, he opened that hollow tree and he ended up getting the misery to himself. So the moral of this folk tale is basically that for riches are no guard against misery, meaning if you are rich, your money is not a guard to keep misery away from you. It takes love and kindness and sometimes a little cunning to keep misery at bay. So, in order to keep misery away from one's life, what one must do is to have love and kindness in them. And also sometimes they need to be clever to prevent misery affecting them. So dear students, this was our comprehension from your Oxford Progressive English Misery on page 165 to 166. I hope that you have enjoyed listening to it. Now dear students, you will have to read this very thoroughly and you will have to underline the difficult words that we discussed in the beginning of the lesson, and you will have to write them down in your notebooks, the words and the meanings. Alright, now let's move towards the exercises of the chapter, page 167. Reading for understanding. So here students, you can see there are 6 questions given to you. You will have to answer all of these questions. Now question number 1. In what ways did misery make life miserable for the poor man and his wife? So answer to this question is into paragraph 1. When it says that misery used to live in the chimney of the poor man's house, and it did not let the fire burn properly, and also it used to be on his dining table and it did not let the meat get tender, and it was always tasteless as well. I hope that you've got the answer of the first question. Now question number 2. How did the poor man try to get across the stream without misery, and how did his attempt fail? Now answer to the question number 2 is into paragraph 2. When the poor man started into the woods with his wife, and when the stream came and the husband put down the plank for his wife to walk across, and quickly he followed her, pulling up the plank before misery could reach it. But when he glanced back, he saw that misery had moved a huge tree trunk so that he could cross the stream and was still following him. So that is how his attempt failed to keep misery from following them into the woods. Question number 3. How did the poor man and his wife succeeded in deceiving misery? So in paragraph 3, when the poor man started saying that how he cannot live with misery anymore, and then he was telling his wife that he's going to get into the hollow of the tree and block himself inside so that he can stay away from misery. And then what happened? What happened was misery was quick because it didn't want to let go of the poor man, so it jumped into the hollow tree first. And what they did, they deceived misery and they captured him into the hollow tree and put the wedges on the hole. So dear students, I hope that you have understood from where you are going to get the answer for question number 3. Now question number 4. In what ways was the couple's life better after they had got rid of misery? Now in paragraph 4, their life has been explained that how it got better. So you will have to read that paragraph very thoroughly and answer the question number 4. Now question number 5. What does the rich man think has happened to the couple? Well, in paragraph 5, it has been explained that the rich man thought that the couple had found some kind of treasure, and that is how their life has changed. Now question number 6. The rich man had plenty of money, so why do you think he wanted more? Now over here in paragraph 5, it has been written the rich man had plenty of money and he was like happy as it is, but he was greedy. It showed his greediness, that he was longing for more money and more treasure in spite of the fact that he didn't need any. Alright, so dear students, I hope that you have understood all of the questions very thoroughly and nicely, and you will be able to answer them, as you will have to write each question along with its answer into your notebooks. Alright, now page 168, reading for interpretation. The final 2 sentences of the story express the moral of the story. The moral is the message, lesson or teaching which can be understood from the story. So the last 3 lines of paragraph 5 of this story is, for riches are no guard against misery. It takes love and kindness and sometimes a little cunning to keep misery at bay. So I did explain this. I am sure the 2 questions which are given, as one is explain what you think the writer meant in these sentences, and number 2 is what do you think you can learn from this moral. So you will be able to answer these 2 questions by yourself, according to yourself, into your notebook as well. Alright, now let's give a look at the grammar part, page 168, suffix ify. So the suffix ify is added to the stem of the noun or adjective to make a verb. So the verb suffix ify has the sense of to make or to become. So the example is beauty. It is a noun. Beautiful is an adjective. It's a quality. Then stem is beaut. Verb with suffix ify, it's going to be beautify. It means to make beautiful. So the second example is person. It's a noun, right? Personal is an adjective. Stem is person, right? So verb with suffix ify becomes personify, which means to make into person. Alright, so students, what you have to do is, there are some words given to you. So what you have to do, for the following nouns, find the stem and then supply the adjectives and the verbs with the suffix ify. As for example number 1 is mystery. Its adjective is mysterious. The stem is mist. And the verb would be mystify after adding the suffix ify. In the same way, you will have to write down the adjective and then the stem and then changing it into a verb after adding ify. Alright, and write it down into your notebook. Alright students, so I hope that you have understood this part nicely and clearly as well. So this was the end of your comprehension, and I hope that you have understood it, you have enjoyed it, and you will be able to do it very easily. Now I will see you into the next lesson. Till then, take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz.